From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there. Welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis, wishing you a very Merry Christmas, if that's your tradition. And, also if it's your tradition, a very happy solstice to you, winter solstice. As we are taping this show right now, we're experiencing the shortest day, and the optimist in me says, hey, it's going to get better from here on out. It gets a little bit lighter almost every single day from here on out. I wish we could say the same thing about our politics, but that's the way it is. So let's begin here. Legend has it that during the Civil War, President Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and he said to her, "So you're the little woman who wrote the book that started this great big war." Well, today, by the way, I know that because I was a student at Harriet Beecher Stowe's school. That's how we know that story. Today we got a contemporary version of that story for you. We're about to meet the man who, back in early September, introduced a motion at the Cook County Board to repeal a newly approved tax on sweetened beverages. Remember it? It was the pop tax. You've heard of it. But the deal was already done and the collections were about to start, and so then as public awareness and discussion began to escalate and millions of dollars began to pour into media buys on both sides, that motion advanced and something of a revolt was ignited. You may remember that too. And then on October 5th, Commissioner John Daly, one of the most senior and most influential commissioners at the board, changed his mind. He announced he was going for repeal. And then on November 21st, the dominoes fell, the repeal happened, and the vote was unanimous. So, as we know today, there's no more pop tax, but the county has a budget that's about $200 million lighter than it would have been if it had passed, and major governmental functions such as the courts and the prison system and the county hospital are all saying that cuts will result in, some critical services being cut maybe. We don't even know yet. But the man who's been in the center of this battle has only been on the board for 3 years, and I think it's fair to say that before a few months ago he was hardly a household word, but now everybody knows Richard Boykin. He's the guy who killed the pop tax, and Richard Boykin is with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Davis. I'm honored to be with you. And honored to have the title of Killing the Pop Tax.
Ain't it something to have you here? And, I have to say, I'm kind of a political junkie, but I was only just barely aware of you before all of this pop tax stuff started happening. And I really want to know from you what it was like, to get sort of personal about how that was to suddenly just have cameras following you everywhere you went. But before we do even that, we got to talk some politics here. Last Thursday, you went to the United Nations. You flew to New York and you met with the United Nations to ask them if they would send peacekeepers into Chicago. What's that about?
Well, so first of all, let me just say that I'm honored to be here.
Oh, thank you.
Also, let me say that I went to the UN not at the taxpayers' expense. I paid for it myself. And the reason why I went is we met with the Assistant Secretary of the UN, and we talked about, he's over peace building. Mm-hmm. We talked about programs that might work in Chicago to help stem the tide of violence that we're seeing on the west and south sides of Chicago. I basically called it a quiet genocide that's occurring in our community. And genocide, under Article 2 of the UN definition for genocide, talks about conditions that focus in on a racial group or an ethnic group that leads to their demise. And so I think all of us can look at and say the violence that's occurring, 80% of those who've been shot and killed in Chicago are African Americans. African Americans make up about 30% of the population. 80+% of the gun violence deaths and gun violence shootings. We look at school closings, we look at the quality of schools in these poor communities, and they're not doing a great job of educating our kids. We look at the double-digit unemployment that exists, Great Depression levels of unemployment. We look at the health disparities that lead to food deserts, that lead to early deaths. And, African Americans are having a tough time of it in the city of Chicago in certain neighborhoods. And so, let me tell you, it was a great meeting with the Assistant Secretary General. He gave us some great ideas. He also revealed that they're doing a youth global study on violence causes and cures, and that he would be interested in coming to Chicago to present on the findings once it's complete in 2018. And so I plan to extend that invitation to him. The trip was never about bringing troops to our soil. Of course, most people understand in order to do that, you have to have a vote in the Security Council, which the U.S. is a permanent member. There have never been foreign troops from the UN on the soil of America. And so I don't think that this would have happened here in Chicago. And so it was all about peace building and not necessarily troops.
Well, you did ask, you mentioned last year that you wanted to set up a commission on the status of African American males, right?
That is correct.
And I believe you said that you were going to bring that up to the county board in August of last year. Did that happen? I'm sorry if I don't remember.
We passed a resolution to set that up. The commission will be fully set up in January. Each different agencies have an opportunity, the president, to put people on that commission. We're going to look at the quality of life for African American males. In too many of our communities, in Austin, for example, black male unemployment is around 60% in Austin. And it could be said the same in many of these other communities that are seeing horrific gun violence. Black males have been incarcerated at rates that are alarming to, the civilized world. In terms of health issues and health disparities, black males suffer disproportionately from that. In terms of dropouts, black boys drop out of school faster than any other group. And so we figure we have to come up with something, some recommendation, some quality of life factors to help improve the quality of life for each and every African American male that lives in Chicago.
Of course, we're already kind of talking about a number of different streams here, but I mean, you had an objective going to the UN that I think was at least partly political. I mean, you kind of wanted to get that image of people with blue helmets all over the place, didn't you? I mean, wasn't that part of why you went there?
Let me tell you what my objective was. The objective is to shine a spotlight on the horrific violence that exists in Chicago. Look, I know Superintendent Johnson and the mayor are talking about the progress that they've made in terms of reducing gun violence over last year's numbers. Last year was just totally out of the box. I mean, nearly 800 people killed by gun violence. This year we've had over 640 people killed. I mean, that's nothing to celebrate. That's nothing to take a victory lap about. We've had 3,500 people shot in a civilized society in this city. And so I wanted to bring the spotlight to it, and bring the world attention to it. Look, quite frankly, I think if we had the political will here in Chicago to solve gun violence, we would have done it a long time ago. We would have done it 10 years ago. It's a multifaceted issue that requires a multifaceted solution. Now, I've been calling for the governor, President Preckwinkle, and Mayor Emanuel to sit at a table like this and to figure out how can we use the state budget, the county budget, and the city budget to deal with this alarming rate of shootings in our society. Just this past weekend, we had 27 people shot, 7 people killed. A number of those were young people. A 13-year-old shot in the face, sitting on a bus, victim of a stray bullet. A 15-year-old delivering newspapers with his stepdad, shot in the head and killed. They call it a case of mistaken identity. I call it being unsafe in the city of Chicago. Elected officials, our number one responsibility is to make sure that people are safe in their neighborhoods. When we don't do that, nothing else really matters. And so we got to make sure that people are safe. That's my number one concern.
Well, as we so often say on this show, everything is everything, because any conversation you have immediately goes into that matrix with all these other issues of disinvestment and poverty and education, and it all just fits together. So it's always kind of hard to figure out. The complexity of the issue also kind of gives you an excuse for why the issue never gets resolved, because it's just so hard, it's just so complicated.
But it's got to get resolved. If you don't resolve it just from a sheer moral standpoint of the fact that people shouldn't be dying at the rates that we're dying, people shouldn't be shot at the rates that they're being shot, And quite frankly, it's in the African American community primarily. But it's beginning to have a spillover effect. It's spilling over onto our highways and expressways. It's spilling over to other areas that hadn't experienced this kind of violence. The poverty is driving carjackings and all other sorts of violence, robberies and that sort of thing. And so from a moral standpoint, you want to solve it, but then from an economic standpoint, we're spending billions on this of money that we could save.
Quoted, I'm sorry, excuse me. You were quoted as saying, "I can't wait around for Mayor Emanuel and Eddie Johnson to fix this problem." And I think you even said that you don't even think 1,000 cops are going to solve the problem either.
No, look, I don't think that the militarization of our streets or of our city neighborhoods is the appropriate way to go. I do think we have to have a right-sized police force. I do think that we have to have police on the streets. But the issue is greater than that. Police are right now solving less than 15% of the homicides. So 85,
and may I interject,
so
5% of people who get shot, right?
Yeah. And
so if you, as we've said 143 times on this show, you can walk down the street with a gun, shoot somebody, as long as you don't kill them, there's a 95% chance that you can walk away without being arrested.
Absolutely. And something has to change about that. And we got to have true community policing. You got to have police that understand the neighborhoods that they're working in. You got to have police that people in the community respect and trust, and don't believe that the folks are working with the gang members, right? And so there's a big wall that is there between the police and the community in many African American communities. But we need each other, and so we have to figure out strategies to bring these two together. And so we can't, quite frankly, wait on the mayor to do this. The community has to rise up, just like they rose up on the sugar tax issue. They have to rise up on this violence issue and say, we demand that our neighborhoods be safe. We demand that our neighborhoods have schools that work, that are quality schools. We demand that our neighborhoods have resources in them. We demand that our neighborhoods have jobs and people have an opportunity to work.
Well, that's a really interesting issue that you bring up, because to oversimplify things, it's a lot easier to get people to get all, run down the street with torches in their hands when they're being taxed for something that they don't want to be taxed on. But to get people upset about the fact that people that they may not know or see or interact with anyway are shooting themselves in a neighborhood where they'll probably never go, it's a lot harder to get the citizenry upset about that.
Let me tell you why I'm so on this issue, and I have been on it since I've been an elected official. Every institution of county government is implicated in gun violence. Stroger Hospital,
Absolutely.
That great trauma center. Most of the folks go to Stroger when they're shot. $55,000 just to stabilize somebody who's a gunshot wound victim. If the person's shot in the back and they have a spinal cord injury, you're talking about millions of dollars in care, depending if the person's 13, 14. You're talking about taking care of the person for the rest of their lives. Right. That's taxpayer money.
Yes,
So it's a different kind of tax, right? It's a tax of violence that you're paying. If somebody's shot and killed, they got to go to our morgue. They got to go to the medical examiner's office. And we got to do an autopsy on that body. That costs money. Guess who pays for that? The taxpayers of Cook County. If they're caught, they go to our Cook County jail. They sit there, and then we got to pay $143 a day just until they get to their trial, and then of course our prosecutors, which we pay for, taxpayers,
probably
and if they can't,
defender.
a public defender. So every institution of county government is implicated.
Right.
The city has its institutions implicated. Chicago Police Department,
Health Department.
And so all of us ought to work together on this issue. And those highway shootings, expressway shootings, that's the state jurisdiction. But if you're governor of a state, you want to make sure that you're governor of a state that's growing and thriving. And you can't thrive with all of this violence. People are leaving the state of Illinois.
Oh, hey, guess what? We're
census
number
is showing us
6. Hooray! As of today, we're number 6. Yeah.
It's nothing that's not a laughing matter.
No, it's
obviously.
not.
It's a terrible thing because people are leaving the city. They're leaving the state because of this violence. That's part of the factor that they're leaving, and lack of opportunity in terms of how the state's being managed and run.
And one of in the stream of stories that come across our consciousness, I saw this morning that housing values in Chicago clicked down a little bit in the last couple of weeks, and we're like the only city where that's happening. Property values are actually going down, and it's part. People are not valuing the city in the way that they once did. And it's all tied to, everything's tied to everything, but this violence issue is driving so much of this. If Amazon doesn't come here, at least a part of it is going to be because they're afraid that their workers will get shot if they come to that violent town. So, yeah, but you say, and I think it's intriguing when you say, the governor owns a piece of this, the mayor owns a piece of this, the county board, your board owns a piece of this. Every level of government does, the Congress people do. But we don't see much in the way of at least overt communication and cooperation between these entities. Why is that?
Look, I can't speak for them, but I'm going to give my board of commissioners some credit here. We got 4 Republicans on the board and the other 13 of us are Democrats. And my community is being devastated by gun violence, the west side of Chicago, and in Maywood.
And it's your district.
And it's my district.
Right.
A lot of my colleagues' districts aren't being hit hard by it.
Yeah.
But to their credit, things that I bring up, they vote on, they vote to pass it. Everybody wants to see this gun violence subside. I know my colleagues do. Now, you got to have the leaders.
Yeah.
The leaders have to lead. And so they have to come together. And quite frankly, you can't come together if you're always talking about each other. You got to put your own personal ego aside.
Yeah.
And you got to say, you know what, the people of the city of Chicago matter most. And if they matter most and if they count most, guess what? I'm going to sit down with the governor. I'm going to sit down with President Preckwinkle. I'm going to figure out, how do we solve this thing? How can we put our resources together? How can we put our, look, I'm the one who put the sheriff's police together with the CPD. That happened 3 years ago. That they're now patrolling in these high crime areas. I did that. And the reason why I did that is because I said to Sheriff Dart, I said, Sheriff, can you patrol in Chicago? Can you arrest in? He said, absolutely, it's part of Cook County. And I said, well, the people pay Cook County taxes. They need protection there. He says, well, the superintendent, Gary McCarthy, he would never talk to him. And so when McCarthy left and Escalante became the interim, I connected Sheriff Dart with him. And guess what? We got a partnership working with the Sheriff's Police and the Chicago Police Department. I'm proud of that. But that wouldn't have happened without my intervention.
Let's get a little bit more specific about this, because this wasn't actually what I intended. I was hoping, not hoping, my intention had been that we were going to sit around and talk about the pop tax and how that all happened. But you know what? I don't care.
Talk about
this is
that too.
way
like
more interesting to me. The Chicago police have been accused of being feudal by no less than their own mayor. There have been these weird upswings and downswings in the number of people arrested, but when they're arresting a lot of people, we're critical of them for over-arresting, and when they're under-arresting, we're critical of them for not doing their jobs. I think that we don't really have any idea what kind of relationship we want with the Chicago Police Department. I don't think we as citizens really know what we want them to do.
I think we do. We want them to protect and we want them to serve. We want them to do it with integrity, and we don't want them to violate people's constitutional rights.
But we see too often that, again, we're on delicate ground here when we say this, but there have been too many violations of civil rights that have happened at the hand of the Chicago Police Department.
No question about it.
And there's been too much violence that was unnecessary, too much shooting that's unnecessary, and it makes us all nervous, and it kind of causes the pendulum to swing a little bit in the wrong direction. You mentioned community policing. We've tried and failed at that several different times. I've been around long enough to have seen probably 3 different cycles of it with 3 different superintendents. I'm just not sure that we as a city really understand what the powers of the police should be or what we want the powers of the police to be. We want the problem fixed, but we really don't know how we want them to go about it.
I think part of it is that you have to have people who are in minority communities as police serving in those communities. So in other words, you have to have people who understand those communities, serving in those communities. I think that's important. I think it breaks down the barrier that exists. And there has to be an awful lot of outreach done because of Laquan McDonald and the 16 shots that that officer did, and because of the John Burge torture stuff. I mean, all of these things work to erode the trust that the community had in the police department. People sort of speculated that these things were happening and they were going on, and nobody in power at the elected official level would actually rein these people in and check them. And then the criminal justice system, of course, adds insult to injury, because they never prosecute these guys. They always wind up walking away, even after they've shot somebody and killed somebody.
And I don't understand that either. I mean, that's another. Oh, we had that debate around this table about, Kwame Raoul and the legislation in Springfield, and the people who feel that all that is just increasing the number of African American kids that get put into the penal system and into the adult penal system, and we're just creating higher level criminals that come back out at the other end. That debate goes on and on. And
it's a big issue, Mr. Davis, and let me tell you why it's a big issue. The pendulum, as you said, has swung in the favor of criminal justice reform. I happened to be at a couple of town hall meetings, one in Oak Park and one up north, where the people were very angry about these carjackings, about the increase in robberies that are taking place, and about the fact that many of the people who are doing the carjacking, the police arrest them, they're back out on the streets within a couple of days, because they're minors in many instances. Two, they're being charged with misdemeanor theft and not felonies. And so people are saying, hey, wait a minute, what is happening here? But the pendulum says, we used to have 10,000 people at our county jail on a given day. Now we have under 6,000 people there on a day. Now, the other thing is people are out on electronic monitoring because of the chief judge and because of Sheriff Dart and that criminal justice reform that we talked about, and bond reform. The other thing is...
Is that a good thing?
Well, the other thing is that on the minor side of things, it's the Juvenile Temporary Detention Center. We used to have 600 to 800 people there a day. We have 200 kids there a day. That's it. And so I think that we've gone, you got to have the right balance. Look, what people want is they want safe streets. And what I maintain always is that every kid who goes to school, who plays by the rules, there ought to be an opportunity for them to succeed and live what we call the American dream. There ought to be a job waiting for them. There ought to be some sort of career path for them. And that's what we got to make sure that happens in these neighborhoods that have Great Depression levels of unemployment, because people deserve an opportunity to work. Those who are coming from correctional facilities, they also must have an opportunity as well to get a second, third, or fourth chance back into the workforce.
But Commissioner, this is one of the macro issues that we're dealing with as a country, that we're dealing with as a planet. There are just fewer and fewer jobs, and the jobs that we have are kind of demeaning jobs for the most part. Unless you are highly educated, you probably won't do as well as your parents did. These are not issues that are Chicago issues. These are global issues as we try to deal with a robotic future and just a world that's rapidly and radically changing.
And that's why our educational system must keep pace, and that's why leaders must also keep pace with the changes in technology. And that's why we must also make sure that we have opportunities for our people to work.
But
there are
jobs.
That
takes money. It takes a lot of money.
I would rather spend money investing in that than spend money investing in the medical examiner's office in terms of gunshot victims, at Stroger Hospital in terms of trying to, take care of people who got gunshot wounds. That's why I'm saying you have to have a radical shift in the funding of our priorities. Look, if we deal with the gun violence that exists on our streets, we'll save billions of dollars. Billions.
Okay, but aren't you trying to have it a little bit both ways here? Because you're talking about how we need to invest in these things, and yet at the commission level, you were kind of, you were almost like taking a sort of a Republican stance on this. I mean,
Oh, wow.
you were quoted as saying that I want less government and I want less money being spent on government.
And so is that a Republican stance or is that a common sense American
don't know.
stance? Let
I
me
don't
tell
know.
you something.
I'm just saying that
I've been a lifelong Democrat, but there are Democrats who understand that we have to rein in government spending.
Mm-hmm.
There are Democrats that understand that you can't go to the people and tax the people until oblivion. Look, the people of the city of Chicago and the county of Cook have been overtaxed for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have taxed them had it not been for me and several of my colleagues.
I think that's
they
an
would have
objective
taxed
fact.
them.
Yes,
and that's an objective fact. And guess what? I would take the same position again and again. If we need the taxes, I'm willing to go to the carpet and sell it to the public, but we ought to sell it to the public. We can't just tax people out of their homes. And that's what we've done here. Look, we've a water bottle tax, a bag tax, a property tax increase, you name it, tax increase, a personal income tax increase. But then here comes the county with a sugar tax increase on Gatorade, on diet sodas, things that don't even have sugar in them. It makes absolutely no sense. And so that's why the people revolted. Whether it be tea or whether it be sugar, the people will revolt every single time. And let me tell you something. I stood up for the people, and that's what all of us ought to do. We all ought to stand up for the people.
you'll get no argument from me that the tax was, kind of clumsy, and it didn't make a lot of sense, and it was difficult to sell, and there's all sorts of reasons why I think people kind of revolted against it. But, and this is the thing that that is of particular interest to me. I think if you look kind of historically at the development of Chicago within Cook County, Chicago's attitude about Cook County, the political attitude about Cook County has always been to kick over to the county all of the crap that we don't want to deal with, right?
Right.
So let them handle putting people in jail, let them handle fixing the sick people and handling the courts and all that kind of stuff. And we will spend our money on streetlights and garbage pickup and snow plowing so that it's always easy for us to be the heroes and let those guys handle all the rest of this stuff. Whether or not that's fair or whether that's even an accurate portrayal, the fact of the matter is that you guys are left with the responsibility for dealing with the people who are the most needy in our city, and you have a responsibility that the city either shirked or just never had for whatever reason. And I am very sensitive when I hear the courts and I hear the jail and especially prosecutors and public defenders and all these people saying this budget does not give us the money we need to do our job.
Let me tell you, whoever said that, they're misleading you.
That would
First
be
of
all of them, wouldn't it?
No, wait a minute. Let's be honest with the people here.
Okay.
First of all, we passed a budget, a $5.3 billion budget that's in balance, that didn't raise taxes on the people. There were those on the other side who said that if we repealed the sugar tax, that they were going to have to cut trauma care, they were going to have to close clinics. None of that happened. We haven't closed any clinics. And quite frankly, guess what? The same level of services that people enjoyed last year are the same level of services that they're getting right now. Now, I told you about criminal justice reform, and let me make another point. We didn't lay off one assistant state's attorney. We didn't lay off one public defender, no sheriff's police, frontline sheriff's police, no correctional guards, no doctors, no nurses. None of them got laid off. Why? Because we wanted to make sure that we had the level of services for the most vulnerable and the most needy in our society. Now, let me tell you something. We didn't need the $200 million. They were going to use that money to add bloat to the government. And we also, because of yours truly, we closed 1,017 vacant and open positions that were costing the taxpayers of Cook County $52 million. Vacant and open positions that had been open and vacant for 2-3 years.
Can we just take a little detour on that, because I never understood
Let's do
that.
it.
I know, just that
Let's
one point,
do it.
because you're on a roll and I want to hear. I don't want to detour this, but This thing about the open positions, I saw you at the hideout thing with Ben Joravsky and Mick Dumke and the Larry Sufferton said at the time that those open positions weren't even funded. They had just a few dollars in them just to keep them open.
Let me tell you, $52 million, according to the budget director. He knows they were funded. It was nothing more than pinstripe patronage. It was patronage for people to be able to put people in those jobs in the middle of the year if they wanted to. And quite frankly, they shouldn't be open. County government must conform itself just like everybody else. We must make sure that we operate within a budget that's reasonable. Now, I'm not for cutting services that put at risk vulnerable citizens. We've begun to clean up county government. That's what we've begun to do. And I'm proud of that. I'm very proud of the fact that we stood up. In fact, the budget passed by a vote of 17-0, a unanimous vote.
Yes.
Now we laid off 321 people out of 22,000 people. Now, 321 out of 22,000. The budget director targeted middle management positions, duplicative positions for those layoffs. And quite frankly, the citizens of Cook County desire that, they deserve it. We have to operate within our means.
Can you tell me today that operations at the Cook County Health and Hospitals group, the hospitals and all the associated things, that their services will not be deteriorated?
I can tell you that for a fact. They will not be deteriorated.
We can play this tape back a year from now.
We can play this tape back a year from now. Let me tell you, there's still yet a lot of waste at the health and hospital system. There's still yet a lot of right sizing that we must do at the health and hospital system. In fact, I was ashamed to get information the other day about the fact that last year in fiscal year 17, they did $165 million in procurement of goods and services. I asked the question at the budget, how much did you do with African American firms as primes and as subs? Of that $165 million, they did 0% with African Americans as primes, and they did 2% with African Americans as subs, or $3.4 million. African Americans, 76% of the users of the hospital, and African Americans make up 26% of the county population. Less than 2% of the contracts for goods and services. Something's wrong. Something's tragically wrong there. And so I'm demanding of the hospital system that they change that policy. And my colleagues chimed in too, and they said they couldn't believe it. They didn't know it. I didn't know it either until I was provided the information, but I asked the right questions at the budget. Let me tell you, there's a lot more we can do at the health and hospital system to make sure that there's equity and make sure that people are cut in. But no services will be diminished at that place. In fact, it's a great system.
Let me ask the same question about the sheriff's office and particularly the jail. We've seen in the last 6 months some just hair-raising stories about just awful things happening at the prison with inmates exposing themselves to county, to public defenders and that whole litany of things that we've seen. Sheriff Dart has, I think it's fair to say Sheriff Dart has said that he's understaffed in his jail. I don't, maybe I'm wrong, but I believe he's said that. Now you say, of course, that there are many fewer inmates than there were. They're down from 10,000 to 6,000. But at the same time, he's also staffing a couple of thousand people out on electronic monitoring too, which probably is more intensive almost than having somebody in a cell that you can keep an eye on. So can you tell me that the jail services are unaffected by the cuts that have been made, and that you'll be willing a year from now to have me play you the tape back saying that the jail ran for the last year without any interruptions that can be laid at the feet of this $200 million that they didn't get?
I will tell you that question. I will tell you that with certainty that one, the Cook County jail is run with professionalism. There are a few people that make mistakes that they shouldn't be making. And, Sheriff Dart has tried to deal with that. I have utmost confidence in the sheriff and his ability to continue to do a great job as sheriff of the county In fact, we've closed a couple of buildings at the county jail. We've knocked them down. And so that's evidence of the fact that we have fewer people there on a daily basis. And what else I would say is this, is that, again, we have to right-size things based on criminal justice reform. We've had some successes. And so that means that, you know, you may not need as much personnel. We were under a consent decree, a court order that required all of those people to be there.
You mean at
the
jail,
sheriff,
right?
At the
Yeah,
jail.
yeah.
The sheriff lost 101 people. 101.
That sounds like a lot of people to me.
No, it's not a lot. It's not a lot when you look at the big scheme of things. It's not a lot of people. In fact, you know, the sheriff, you know, he was in agreement with the budget, and initially he was going to lose many more than that, almost 200. But he found creative ways to save money in his budget, and he got almost 100 people off that list.
Do you have confidence in him? You
I
think
have
he's doing a good job?
I have total confidence in Sheriff
You'll
Toni.
vote for him again?
Absolutely.
All right.
120%.
So, let me just say, by the way, you're watching Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. I've just completely lost control of everything here because we got Richard Boykin with us. And Richard Boykin is the first district commissioner at the at the Cook County Commission. See, you got me all confused here. He's the first district commissioner at the Cook County Board. And as we said at the introduction, he's Mr. Killer, slayer of pop taxes. Anywhere there's a pop tax, you bring him in, he will slay it. And we did have pages and pages of very detailed things we wanted to go through here, but we threw that all out because we're just kind of like wandering all over the place, which I like to do. I think it's kind of a fun thing to do. Shall we continue our tour? The court system, Tim Evans, has actually gone so far as to sue the county board because the county board is trying to get $26 million out of him. He says that he just can't run the courts, and furthermore that there's a kind of a constitutional issue here because he's a freely elected individual. He was elected to run the court system, and he shouldn't have to be taking orders from the likes of you. And you said, we simply do not need as many employees and the citizens are overtaxed. So,
I don't know if it's as simple as that, but let me say this. I think that the battle between Chief Judge Tim Evans and President Preckwinkle goes back decades.
it does.
Into Hyde Park and into
It
the
certainly
Fourth
does.
Ward and all
Yeah.
of that. But, you know, whether or not there are vestiges of this that are playing out in the budget. But what I will say is this, is that I don't think we can tell Chief Judge Tim Evans who he has to lay off. But I do think that the board, as the Board of Commissioners, can set a budget framework by which he must meet. Mm-hmm. That's our obligation as almost a board of supervisors.
You have a kind of a split responsibility
Right.
here because you guys raise the taxes and allocate the tax money, right?
Right. That's our legislative function. Now, what I will say is this, is I think that the Chief Judge has done an outstanding job with bond reform and with all sorts of other reforms that have reduced the number of people going to jail, to reduce the number of people going to the juvenile temporary detention center. And so I do expect that the court system will figure out what needs to be done there. But nobody's been let go. There's a temporary restraining order.
Which puts
on
more
that
stresses
office.
on the budget, right?
Well, I mean, you add the fact that we just lost a case in court, $48 million judgment against us for actions of a doctor at the hospital.
Yeah, that
I
was a
mean,
big
all
one,
of these things help to put stresses on the budget, but quite frankly, let me tell you, I understand that we will get through this, and I look forward to whatever the court rules, and we will have to abide by that. I look forward to working with Chief Judge Tim Evans. I like him a lot. I think he's doing a tremendous job in the judiciary, and you know, we look forward to working with him.
What I really want to know is the relationship you have with Toni Preckwinkle. Toni Preckwinkle has been a frequent guest on this show. She has sat in that chair and explained the budget to us, and she gave a full-throated endorsement for the pop tax sitting in that chair and all
sure
the
she
reasons
did.
that she needed it. I have come to have a lot of respect for you. I already had a lot of respect for Toni Preckwinkle, and it's kind of weird to see mommy and daddy fighting like this. And I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to believe anymore. So was she just dead wrong about the need for this money? Is she just a tax and spend liberal?
I didn't say that.
I didn't say you did.
What I will say is
Wait,
this.
hold on. Before you go any further, you are in a race for your first district, and you're running against Brandon Johnson, and Brandon Johnson said that you have aligned yourself with Republican ideology.
I know.
He said Richard is committed to cutting services and jobs, protecting the interests of big corporations and the wealthy. So, that's what's out there.
Well, those are the talking points of failed individuals. Let me tell you what we've done. We've balanced the budget. We've done it without cutting services. We've worked together. Let me tell you, if you want to say I've aligned myself with Republican forces, that vote on the budget was 17-0. The vote to repeal the pop tax was 15-2.
I'll say it for the second time today. Impressive as
So I mean,
all get out.
then it must be everybody on the board has aligned themselves in that way, or everybody on the board has aligned themselves in terms of protecting working class families and protecting their pocketbooks. Look, this is about your pocketbook. This is about the families that we seek to represent.
Yeah.
This is about Miss Jones, who's trying to make ends meet, got a couple of kids, but yet her grocery bill's going up because of the sugar tax.
Okay, all right. Let's go inside this process. Toni Preckwinkle succeeds with a razor's edge margin in getting the pop tax.
It was her vote.
It was her vote that did it. She had to, because somebody was absent at the time, and she had to go in and cast the deciding vote. Almost from that day, there was, as we know, a lot of hullabaloo about this, and we all know what happened. But when that moment happened, to me, the dramatic moment, the moment that I saw, oh my God, Daley has just, you know what that means? Daley just said he's changing his vote, right?
But I have maintained that all along. I maintained the fact that we didn't need that tax. I maintained the fact that, look, we can cut some things in the budget, the waste in the budget. We can close these open and vacant positions, and we can balance the budget. I maintained that at least 7 or 8 months before Daley even came out. Mm-hmm. And he came out and pretty much said the same thing that I said.
All right, so he makes this change, and that kind of, let's face it, that kind of signals to other people on the board, it's cool, you can do this too, right? So, but that's not really my question. My question is, at first, Toni Preckwinkle appeared to be kind of pouty about it. She said, well, all right then, if you want that, you just have to cut the $200 million. I'll see you later. And that only lasted about a day. And then she rolled up her sleeves and she got with you, and she, as far as I can tell, really kind of drove the bus on finding how we can do this without the pop tax. So what's happening between the two of you at this time? Are you guys talking? Do you is it icy and cold and mean, or what? I want to know. I want to know the gossip of this.
Well, here's the deal. I mean, we disagreed on that. We disagreed on the sales tax increase.
Very publicly, yeah.
And where I think she's right, I'll vote with her and I'll be an advocate for her. But she can't count on me just to fall in line. Now, she's behind my opponent, quite frankly, and she would actually count on him to be a vote for her on the board.
Do you know that, or are you just surmising that? Is there evidence that she's...
Yeah, there's evidence there that she recruited this guy to get in the race, and she's.
Okay. I didn't know that.
So I mean, it's fine. I mean, it's
Brandon Johnson.
Yeah, all is fair. I mean, it's all good. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't mind, because let me tell you, I have a record that I'm proud of, and I have results that we've delivered for people of the 1st District. And where President Preckwinkle is right, I'll be for her. Where she's wrong, I'll be against her. And that's just the type of person I am. I am an independent voice on that board, always have been. And some people don't like that. They don't like the fact that I don't fall in the line, in terms of
So you're just a new kid. You've only been around for a couple of years.
Well, I've been around for 3 years, but worked for Congressman Danny Davis
Yeah,
before that for 10 years.
May I just say something? This is a bizarre turn of events here, but I'm an older gentleman, and I got started in radio in the 70s. And in the late 70s, when Danny Davis was an alderman with Cliff Kelly and everything, I did a lot of radio things with them, interviewing them. And I've been listening to a lot of recordings of you lately, and if I just close my eyes, you sound like Danny Davis. You sound amazingly like Danny Davis.
Well, I think his voice
You must have spent a lot of time with him or something.
I think his voice is much better than mine. I think
It's deeper a little.
he's
but-
much deeper,
Yeah.
and I think he's got a lot of wisdom. And I love that guy. I love him like a father. And quite frankly, he's my mentor, he's my friend. And I call him, I talk to him almost every day. And I talked to him about this sugar tax, but I also held a number of town hall meetings about it in my district, and people didn't want it. They didn't want it. Quite frankly, they did not want it.
Did he think it was a bad idea?
He thought it was a bad idea.
So I can't help but think that, when progressives do it, I guess it's okay. When Louis Gutierrez calls up his buddy Chewy and says, I'm going to quit, you can have the seat. Let's work it out so that we would do it. Is Danny Davis going to do that for you? Is that why you're not running for any higher offices? Because you know you got Danny Davis's seat lined up? Is that what's happening here?
I am running for re-election to the county board. I'm excited about running for re-election,
I'm sure you
I'm
are.
excited about the work that we're doing in the 1st District. We've done a lot, but we've got a lot more to do. We got to make sure that we got a fair property tax system that people can be proud of. Our current assessment system has some flaws in it and some problems. Preckwinkle proposed a study. We don't need another study. We need results. We got to make sure that we do something about this horrific gun violence. And so I got a little bit more work to do, and I want to bring more resources
So
to the
it
first.
really does sound to me like what you're saying in a very polite and diplomatic way, that you're not that crazy about the job that Toni Preckwinkle is
I am
doing.
not. I am not. And, quite frankly, I think there's some steps that she's made that have caused the county some heartache and some pain. She's done some good, but not nearly enough, not nearly as much as she could have. And quite frankly, on this last budget, she really didn't want to do it. She reluctantly drove that bus because she knew the votes on the board were against her. And so she was the reluctant driver of that bus. I thank her for driving the bus, because if she hadn't, we would have.
But yet the two of you say almost exactly the same things when you talk about empowerment and this matrix of problems in the city government and the city budget and African American disinvestment and all that. I mean, you sing from the same choir book.
It's not about singing, it's not about talking, it's about doing. And she has not done, quite frankly. And we got to do. People in the streets expect us to do. People in Austin and West Garfield and East Garfield, people in North Lawndale, people in Inglewood, they expect us to deliver for them. They expect safe neighborhoods.
They do.
They expect jobs to be available for them and for their children. And we got to do that. And so that's what I'm committed to doing.
So you could have been the Barack Obama of the county board. You know that. You absolutely know that. You had this incredible, bright, shining moment in the spotlight, and everybody else was old and out of it. And here's this young rising star who's saying all the right things, even taking a little bit of the conservative view of we've got to have less taxes and all that. You got the whole package here. And you kind of toy with the idea that you're going to take on Toni Preckwinkle, and I put my $10 down that you could have beat her. So why'd you pull out of that? Why'd you decide not to?
Because I talked to the people in my district. The people in my district thought that my voice could be better served on the board as a voice on the board for them.
Better than as president
as
of the
an
board?
independent voice on the board. Look, I've been in office for 3 years, and I've often been accused of a lot. I've been accused of wanting to get to higher office and all of that. Quite frankly, I think working on the county board has helped me to gain experience. It's helped me to tackle issues and to be a great advocate for people who are poor and working class. And I want to continue to do that. I think we need a little bit more experience before we get to that next level. And so, you know, I'm proud of the decision that we made.
I thought I'd just pause there and just see.
I'm proud.
That may be the one moment in this entire conversation where I think your credibility has just slipped a little bit there, because I'm not buying it. I think I think you clearly have a lot going for you, and you know it. And so anyway, yeah, well, okay, let's not do this to you. That's not fair. We have 2 or 3 minutes left. I don't even know what to do here. Well, you also didn't even go for the Duckworth seat either. You were talking about running for Senate there for a little while.
I mean, we looked at it. We did an exploratory committee.
Yeah.
We went.
Yeah.
We met a lot of people across this great state. There again, I got some good advice from people who I respect a great deal, that the timing wasn't right.
Oh, where should we go from here? I really wanted to talk to you about your 7-point plan. You have, for a freshman commissioner on the Cook County Board, you're probably the only one who has a 7-point plan for how to deal with the violence in Chicago. And you're talking about parent workshops, curfew enforcement, drug court expansion, domestic terrorism charges. We could do a show on every single one of these things. Expansion of the sheriff's police, stiffer penalties, job training, and all that. And I have to say that unfortunately this stuff kind of, as an older American, it's kind of one of these things that just kind of looks to me like we've heard so many of these things in these buckets before. And I don't know how you can do it. Maybe if you had like $200 million, you could really start working on some of these projects.
Let me tell you something. So, there's some people who say that I don't favor tax increases or tax revenue. I put forward a plan 2 years ago to raise the gas tax by 5 cents. But every penny of that would have gone into a youth jobs program to help our infrastructure, improve our infrastructure. Gas prices have been historically low. And we also had a thing in there that if gas prices went to $4 or $5 a gallon, that we would take the tax off, the 5 cents off. President Preckwinkle didn't get behind it. Guess what? Would have been a brilliant idea. We'd have $50+ million in that fund right now. Would have been a brilliant idea. I mean, we put forward some brilliant ideas that she has failed to get behind because personally she doesn't like me. And so that is the reason why her judgment is off, and that's the reason why, she didn't get the sugar tax. Because, I mean, quite frankly, she let her own personal individual feelings get ahead of the real business of the county.
It's not very often that somebody will just outright say that she doesn't like me. I mean, it's personal then.
Oh, it's personal. It is, but it's not personal for me.
Did you do something? I mean, do you have some history or something with her?
I think the fact that I dared to stand up and speak truth to power. I think the fact that I would bring my decision making based on my district as opposed to falling in line like a rank and file Democrat. I'm not that. That's not who I am. The people know me. They know that I'm going to fight for them day and night. They know that I wake up in the morning with them on my mind, and I go to sleep at night trying to figure out how can I make the quality of life better for the residents of the 1st District and the county at large.
I'm down to literally seconds here, so I got to try to throw a few other things at you. I don't want you to get out of here without having a little bit of a conversation about Eddie Johnson. Do you think Eddie Johnson is the right guy for the job?
I like Superintendent Johnson. I think he's got to do more, and he's got to do it quickly. And if there are no changes, if things don't change fast, then I don't know how much longer he'll be there.
And what about the FOP? I mean, this is such a huge issue right now, where the police, they kind of elected what I would call a fairly extreme union position, and in many ways, they're the guys who are kind of leading the discussion right now.
Well, we got to figure out, how do we work with them? How do we build bridges with them? How do we bring them to the table and get them to understand what's happening in the streets? I mean, police have a lot of stressors on them. They have a lot of challenges. The stress of the ACLU tickets and stuff like that. The mounted stress of a community not working with them to help solve some of the contact cards, all of these things. And so we have to figure out, how do we work with the police? How do we work with the union? If I could be of help in that area, I want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that it was interesting that Eddie Johnson kind of tapped you down a little bit the other day when was it yesterday, wasn't it? I think in the Tribune he said something about he appreciates your energy. And whenever a statement begins with, I appreciate his energy, but he'd be better, time would be better spent building bridges and relationships in the city and with other local partners, state partners and federal partners.
Here's the deal on that. Building bridges with other folks in the city. Again, the mayor, the governor, and President Preckwinkle. Why haven't they sat down to talk about this violence that's affecting the city of Chicago?
Why haven't they?
You got to ask them.
All right. Should we drop it there?
Merry,
I guess we have
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too. Will you come back like a bunch of times?
Anytime.
All right.
I'm yours. I'm yours. You can have me.
I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and I know that your time is incredibly valuable. And we're just a little show on Access TV, so I know it's getting a big star in this is a big deal. But I'd love to have you come back, like I said, a bunch of times, because we haven't even started talking about the things that we really need to talk about. And I think it's really important to talk about these bigger issues of how do you deal with the underlying, all that stuff.
I'll be back.
Ta-Nehisi Coates got hit the other day. We'll talk about that another time, about whether he's a neoliberal. Are you a neoliberal, by the way? I don't know. I haven't decided that yet.
I'm a progressive Democrat.
A progressive Democrat. Okay. All right. Good. Well, yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Richard Boykin, for being with us today and for getting me all confused and flummoxed and stuff. I loved it. It's really good talking to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
And we will talk to you again.
Yes.
Merry Christmas to you, and thanks for watching. And thanks to Dave Resnick for pulling this all together today. He's our producer today, and it's great to have Dave on board. And thank you for watching. Don't forget, you can watch any of our shows by going to this address at any time and see like 7 years of them or something. And like I always say, what a great way to spend the holiday weekend, watching old Chicago Newsroom. That's what I'm going to do. See you in a couple of weeks. We've got a whole bunch of stuff starting up in January, and we'll tell you about that later on, okay? Thanks very much for watching. Happy New Year.